And also it need to have internet connection for you to continue working with all the features. And also it's sometimes it dependent on the browser that is provided by the device, so there can be relevant limitations or issues there. And since we don't have the access for native APIs and features, we are not able to provide advanced features using web-based application. So next we have hybrid application, so which we will be mainly focusing on today. So it can be summarized as a combination of native apps and web apps. So we have available frameworks like React Native, Flutter, and Xamarin. So the most important positive of this is that we are using a single code base. Because of that, it is very quicker and cost effective for businesses. And in hybrid applications, the frameworks that we use, we are provided with the access for the native API. So we are able to access the device features as well. So as we know, since we're using a single code base, it's easier to maintain and deliver new features for the application. So the negatives would be it's a bit slower than the native applications. And also based on the framework you choose, there can be limitations for certain native APIs and features. And also for certain frameworks, there can be dependencies with third-party platforms. So today we will be mainly focusing on React Native, which is a hybrid application technology. So next we will straightly dive into React Native. So it's important to focus on their slogan, which is learn once and write anywhere. So it's not write once and run anywhere. So the main goal of React Native would be to enable developers to learn a specific language and then enable them to build and run multiple applications in platforms. Yeah, so what is React Native? So React Native is an open source mobile application framework, or you can say a library, which is created by Facebook. So this framework can be used to develop real and native looking UIs for iOS and Android. So React Native is based on React, which is also a JavaScript library, which is provided by Facebook. And as you know, this enables us to maintain a single code base for multiple platforms. So when it's come to React Native implementation, we use a mixture of JavaScript and JSX. So JSX is XML and HTML like syntax, which is provided by React. And we use this to develop components. So React Native compiles JavaScript code into native components, which is why we are able to access APIs and also native modules. And because we are able to access native modules and APIs, we are able to access features like phone camera, user location, push notifications, and so on. And also, as of now, React Native currently support multiple platforms, including Android, Android TV, iOS, and macOS and Windows. So why do we use React Native? So as you know, it's a cross-platform framework which comes with many benefits. And also it mainly uses JavaScript. So if you're specifically coming from a web development background, it's very easier for you to understand and learn React Native. And also, since we have the access for the native APIs, there's a improved performance as well when you compare with other frameworks. And one of the most important thing in React Native is it has a larger developer community. So whenever you have an issue, you can easily get answers from the community itself. And React Native usually keeps on releasing newer versions. So as of now, it's the latest version is 0.64. And it basically gives us newer features with each release, and also they also focus on delivering better developer experience as well. And also in React Native, it has a support for third-party libraries and also native modules. So based on the feature you'd like to deliver, this will be very useful. And since React Native has a higher demand, there's a good career opportunities as well. And another reason is that currently so many popular companies actually use React Native for their mobile application development. So I have listed down few things here. So you might see few popular applications you already use as of now. Right. So to begin with React Native, you need to have a better understanding about programming concepts and also need to have some basic knowledge of JavaScript since we are using JavaScript overall the application. And also since we are using JSX, it is provides the familiarity, you need to have the familiarity of HTML and CSS. And if you already know React.js, it's actually you're halfway there because React actually uses the same concept as React Native. Yeah, so first what we will do is we will focus on a few basic things into React Native. So I will go one by one here. So components. So components is one of the main building blocks of the React Native app. So when you initially create a React Native app, it has the root component, which is called app. And so I have given a sample diagram here. So you can see the root component is app. And then inside that you have the contacts component. And inside the contacts component, you have many nested components. So it'll be similar to this. When you create an application, you will have a similar hierarchy there. So components can be used to develop any level of elements in your application. So it can be simply a button or a screen. So for all that, we are currently using components for implementing those elements. So when creating components, there's two options for you to use. That's functional or class components. So I will go in detail with the functional and class components later. And also components are controlled by props and state. So for props and state also, I will go in detail and give you further examples there. So next thing what we need to understand is component lifecycle. So this is taken from the React Native official documentation. So here we are mainly focusing on class components. So the first thing that usually happens is component get mounted. So then we have a method called constructor. So it will be first call, and usually we use constructor in order to initialize state or any other value. So once it's called, then the render method will be called. So render method is where we actually return the UI elements. So once that's mounted to the view, we will be calling component did mount. So the component did mount, component did update, and component will unmount are called as lifecycle methods, which is available for class components. So then when we'll focus on updating of components. So there's three ways you can actually re-render a component. So either you can change props or change the state, and then there's a separate method to forcefully update the render method. So every time a component re-renders, the component did update method will be called. So this will be used to basically set any information like call any methods based on a changed property or a state. So based on your requirement, you can use that method. And component did mount will be usually used if you want to add in a listener to the component. So usually that will be handled here. So next, what will happen is component will be unmounted from the view. So for that, we have a separate lifecycle method, which is component will unmount. So here we usually use that to actually unmount the component. And if you want to remove the listener methods here, so you will be using this method. So I hope you got a basic idea of the lifecycle methods in components. So now what I want to do is give a bit comparison between class and functional components. So class component is a basic JavaScript class, which is extended from the base class from React, which is called component. And in class components, you have the access to lifecycle methods. So these are the methods I previously mentioned. So it can be render, component did mount, and component did update likewise. And then in order to update the state of the component, we will use a method called setState. And if you compare class components with functional components, it's a bit complex syntax and also require more lines of codes when you compare with the functional components. So what are functional components? So functional components are plain JavaScript functions that accept props and return a UI element. So previously, until React Native version 0.59 was released, we were not able to actually manage any state values in a functional component. We were only able to use functional component as stateless components. But with 0.59 release, they provided something called hooks. So I will explain that further down the line. So there are two hooks that we usually commonly use. Those are use effect and use state. So use effect is used to access the lifecycle methods similar to the class component. And then we use state hook in order to create and update the state. So when you compare with class components, it has better readability, and the syntax also simpler than class component. Yeah. So here I have written the same component as a class component and a functional component. So as you can see, we are creating class called Hello World app, which extend with the component which is imported from React. And then we have the render method where we return the UI elements. And when you look at the functional components, we are simply using a const variable where it's the same name as here, and it's assigned with the inline function. It simply just return the component given here. So we don't have a separate render method here. So because of that, you can see the lines of codes are much less than the class component. So this is a very simple component, but when you're actually doing the development, there can be lifecycle methods usages. So in that case, for functional components, we are using use effect, which is much simpler than the lifecycle methods provided in class component. So usually React Native recommends you to go ahead with the use of functional components. They have recently deprecated few lifecycle methods provided in class components as well. And they focus on keep improving the functionality of the functional components. Right. So next we will look into props. So basically props are parameters that allow to customize components. It enables us to make the component reusable. And unlike state, props are not editable. So it's read only. And these are used usually when you pass down from the parent component. So here I have given some examples. So you can see there are two functional components. So lots of greeting component is the parent component. So as you can see, we have the view component, which is imported by React Native. And inside view component, there are multiple usage of greeting component, which is the child component. And here you can see we are using a prop called name. So you can see multiple values are passed in here. So if you go to the greeting component, you can see we are taking in the props as the parameter, and then inside the text label, we are using hello and then the name that is passed in. So we can reuse the greeting component in multiple places when you are actually using a parent component. So it will be very useful to improve the code reusability. Right. So next we will focus on to state. So state is a parameter that basically allows you to customize the component. And unlike props, you are able to change the state value. And this is usually initialized inside your component. So unlike props, it is passed down from the parent component, but for states, it's initialized inside the component. So when it's come to functional components, we use useState hook. So as you can see in the example, I'm importing useState from React, which is a hook, and then I'm using it here. So you can see, so usually useState returns an array. So for the first element is the state variable. And then as the second element, we are given a function. So we can give any name we want. So set count is the function that is used to update the count. So when you're passing down the use state, here you give the initial value. So for example, the initial value of count will be 0. And as you can see in this button element, we are using set count in order to update the count value. So hope you got a bit of understanding of state there. So next we will look into styles. So styles is something that is commonly used throughout the application. So it basically uses the JavaScript for styling the application. And if you check the core components from React Native, so you can see we are importing few components from React Native library. So all these components have a prop called style. So if you want to pass down the styles, you will be using this style prop. So style namings are very much similar to CSS. Only thing is it uses camel casing. So you can see in the example here. So we have camel casing there. And when you're providing styles for the component, there's two ways of providing that. So I will go to one of the examples. Yeah. So here you can see I have assigned the style directly into as an object. So here this is called inline styling. So usually this is not recommended because it reduces the code readability when you have a larger component. So it is recommended to have use style sheet, which is provided by React Native. So as you can see, we use style sheet and then dot create. So you can provide all the styles used in this component. So it basically makes the readability, and also this style will be only passed into native side only once, which will provide a bit of improvement on the performance as well. So as you can see, I'm using the styles for the view as styles.container. So next, we will go through hooks. So hooks were recently released, and it was released in React 16.8. And for React Native, it was available in 0.59. So initially, as I mentioned earlier, functional components were not able to deliver the same functionalities as class component. But by introducing hooks, we were able to replace class components using functional components. So it enables us to use the features that are provided by a class component. So as you know, it reduces the code complexity. So I have given few basic hooks. So I have already introduced use state, and also use context is one of the commonly used hooks. Yes. So now we look into building your first native application. So there's two options for you. So one is Expo CLI and then React Native CLI. So if you look into Expo CLI, Expo is an open source library which is basically built around React Native in order to provide few tools. It is best for people who are new to mobile development because it basically handles all the native configurations and native changes by itself. So so it also provides the shared native runtime. So because of that, you don't have the ability to access the native code. So usually if you are using React Native CLI, you would do native configurations with the plist files and then XML files in Android Studio. So this is altogether handled in a file called app.json. So one of the benefits here is that if you want to only focus on React Native and not worrying about native development, you can choose this method. And and also when it's come to React Native CLI, everything else is publishing, protesting, all that is handled in a normal native application way. So usually you would have to add everyone into a testing group and send them requests from relevant app stores. So for Expo CLI, there's an application called Expo Go. So from this, you can simply enable someone to install the application by scanning a QR code. So it's very easy to share your application in order for testing. And next thing is this can be basically considered as one of the breaking points for Expo CLI. So it doesn't actually provide the ability to extend the native functionality in your application, and you're not able to integrate third-party native libraries. So because of this, most of the people don't select Expo CLI, especially if you're developing a industry level application. With the features that you develop, there's a possibility that you want to add native configurations. So based on your requirement, you can of course select the option you want. So if you're creating a React Native project using Expo CLI, you can simply install Expo CLI globally, and then you can use Expo init, then project name. So once you go inside the project folder, you can simply run the project using npm start. Then next, we will look into React Native CLI. So this is usually suitable for developers who are already familiar with mobile development. And for this, you need to install Xcode and Android Studio. And there's quite a few configurations to be done. And with this method, you have the option to change the configurations or integrate any native modules, since you are able to actually access iOS and Android codes there. So if you're creating an application from this, you can first install npm React Native CLI, or if you're using npx, you can simply just run the command, since it's enable us to basically run the command without installing the module. So you can say npx and React Native init and then project name. So then we have a separate thing called bundle, where we manage all the JavaScript code. So in order to start the bundler, you need to run npx React Native start. Then you can run the application using this command, which is npx React Native run Android. And if you're running the iOS project, you can say run iOS. Right. So next we will do a quick demo. So I will do a simple counter application just for you to understand the basics there. So first, what you need to do. So the first what you need to do is set up your development environment. So if you're using Expo CLI, you just simply need to install Node.js. And then as I mentioned earlier, you just can simply create the project like this. But if you're using native CLI, so as they have mentioned in the documentation, you need to install Xcode and Android Studio. So in the documentation, they have provided clear guidance on what to be configured. So for example, for Mac OS, you're able to configure by using this method, but for Mac OS, you have the ability to configure both iOS and Android. But if you have Windows, you're only limited for Android. So you're not able to build your iOS projects. So that's same for Linux as well. For Linux, you have the ability to build your Android project, but not iOS. So I will not go through this in detail since the documentation provide clear details there. And also I have already done that. And the next thing is you need to select the IDE. So there's plenty of IDEs available. And I would say the most commonly used ones are Visual Studio Code and Atom. So today I'm currently using Visual Studio Code. Right. So I have already created the project. So as you can see, so we just go through the folder structure here. So initially one of the two important folders are Android and iOS. This is where we have all the native code. So for iOS, we have a separate one here. And if you create your React Native project using Expo, then you will not have these two folders. So it's basically hidden away from you. And if there's a situation where you initially create your application using Expo, and then you want to have access to native code, then they provide a method called eject, where it basically converts the project into a similar project as React Native CLI. Then we have the node modules installed. And so I earlier mentioned we have a root component called app, which is used as the main component in the application. And then we have the package JSON where we manage all the dependencies. So first in order to run the project, you need to have a emulator up. So I have already run the emulator. So if you don't have it up, you can simply go to Android Studio and open the AVD, and I have plenty of emulators created, but if you don't have any created, you can simply go here and create an emulator. Right. So let's first run the project. So I will run in Android first. So in the demo, we will simply create an application like this, where we have a label in order to display the count value. And then we will have two buttons in order to increase and decrease the count value. So let's wait till we build the project. Right. Yeah. So when you initially run the project, it will already give you a sample template where it basically have a welcome text with all the links to main components. So what we will do first is we will remove this code, and we will not be needing this as well. And they have a separate component code section. So I will be removing that as well. So I will remove all the styles here. So as you can see, they have provided type for the component as well. So in React Native, we have the option to use TypeScript as well instead of JavaScript. So today I will just remove the defined type. So let's create a wrapper component using view. So I want to first give the styles here. So I will define a style here as, let's give flex1, and then let's align the elements center, and I will give some padding as well. And then you can simply access this styles and then content. So next, what we need to have is we need to display the count value. So we need to have, so we have already imported the text component. So we use that to display the label. So let's say count value is, right. So next, what we need is to a place to store the count value. So as I mentioned earlier, we use state in order to maintain changeable values. So first, what I would do is import use state hook. Then I will define the array and assign the initial value. So I explained this bit earlier. So let's say count as a variable name, and then set count as the function we use to change the count value. So I will give the count value here. And let's give some styling for text as well. I'll just say text. So you can use any naming convention for your styles. So it's better to use one naming convention throughout your project. So it's clear for all the developers. So I'll give font size as 25, and then let's say text align. And also a bit of padding there. So I will give that as a style. So as I mentioned earlier, all these components have the style prop. So we can simply just assign the styles there. So if you look into this, so we can see the label is rendered. So initial value we provided is 0. So if I change this to 1, the initial value will be set as 1. So then let's add in 2 buttons. So first I will create a wrapper component in order to style the buttons. Okay, first I will define the style here. So let's say, so I'll assign it here. So let's say, so in this example, we are rendering the buttons in row. So the default way of rendering is a column. So in order to render it in a row, I will say flex direction row. And then let's say justify content space. So we give some padding here as well. Right. So next we need to have button component in order to handle press functionality from the user. So I will first import the button component. And so let's give the title as plus. And then there's a prop code on press. This is where we pass in the method to call when the trigger is happened. So we can pass in a function here. So in the function, since we are calling this plus button, so I will call the set count method and increase count value by 1. Yeah, so similar to that, I will add minus button as well. So instead of adding, we will reduce the count value. Yeah. So as you can see, it didn't take much time. So it was a simple implementation where, so I will change this to 0 again. So once I click on plus, it will increase the count value. And if I select minus, it will reduce. So as you can see, we are using the set count method, which is provided by useState hook in order to change the state value. So hope you got a bit of understanding on how the components, styles, and state is used. So next, we will look into a few important things which is needed when you're actually developing an application. So usually certain application will have multiple components. So it can have many screens and many components in your application. So for that, we need to find a way to manage the state between components. So a simple example will be, let's say you log into a screen and then you need to store your user information. So user information will be needed for rest of the components. So how do we manage those values in your application? So in React Native, they have provided some for functional components, there's a hook called use context, which I previously mentioned. So this context API provides us a way to access the data in the nested component. So usually if you're passing down as props, you need to pass it in each and every level. So in practical scenario, this is not a best practice. So using context API, you can simply access them in the nested component itself. So you don't need to pass down from each component. So, but the only issue is when the application grows and the complexity increases, you're not able to use context API in order to manage your state. So it will be very complex when it's come to coding, and the readability will be very difficult. So usually context API is not recommended to use if your application is complex. If it's a smaller one, then it would be fine. But for a big application, there are open source JavaScript libraries available. So two of the commonly used libraries are Redux and Mobex. And here, so basically Redux manage one store. Store is where we manage all the states in your application. So in Mobex, the main difference is it has multiple stores. So I will not go through in detail here. So based on your requirement in your application, you can choose the library you want. And the next thing is usually mobile application will have multiple screens. So how do we manage the transition between components? So in order to do that, we need a navigator. So these two libraries are recommended by React Native. So there are many options available. So React Navigation basically provides a simple functionality to use stack navigation and also tab navigation. And React Native specifically provides you a very native looking navigation. So if you're mainly focusing on that, you can use React Native navigation. So, but when you compare with the usage of these two libraries, mostly developers use React navigation. So next, so we will look into Storybook next. So this is an open source tool which is used for developing your UI components. It actually provides you to the ability to isolate your UI components from the business logic. And this will be very useful when you actually developing the component in a responsive manner. And also because we are mainly focusing on the component only, it improves the code quality and reusability of the component as well. And also Storybook provides you a common place to navigate to your component and render each component in different states. So it's easier to access all components, and specifically if a new developer joins into your project, this will be very useful because there's one place you can simply render and see all the components. So as I mentioned, it provides a better documentation. And currently Storybook provides support for React and React Native and also Vue and Angular. So another important thing is, so when you're developing with your application, usually we will be developing custom components. So there are a set of core components provided by React Native. So apart from that, if you want to create custom components, you will basically develop custom components. So these libraries provide you inbuilt components. So if you want to use basic components like input and modals, those can be accessed from these libraries. So based on your requirement, so if you want to have a better native look, then you can use native base. And also there are many other libraries provided, which provides you the inbuilt ready-made components. Right. So so those are the main things I wanted to highlight in our session. So if you're interested in learning further with the React navigation and React Redux, and also the best practices that you need to use when developing with React Native, you can simply go through these links. So few months back, we did a React Native bootcamp from 99X from Mobile Focus Group. So I've added the links here. So if you're interested, you can simply refer those. Yeah, so those are the main things I wanted to focus on today's session. Hope you got some important facts when it's come to React Native, and hope you will go through these links as well. So since it will be very useful for you to learn things further. Yeah, so yeah, Isro, are you there? And if you guys have any questions, you can maybe ask them right now.
Yep. Nirodha, we can take a few questions up
Yeah.
to 6:10. I think we already have a few questions in the chat.
Okay.
The first question is from Chanaka, and he asked what we can use instead of component did update.
Yeah, so usually component did update is used in class components. So if you're using functional components, you will use effect hook, which basically provides you a combination of component did update, component did mount, and component unmount. So there's different ways of using use effect. So we will be using use effect in order to handle all these scenarios. Yeah, so the next one is, does 99X use any other frameworks to develop mobile apps? Yeah, especially Flutter. So Flutter, yeah, so we have recently started using Flutter. So Flutter also increasingly getting popular like React Native. But I think one of the benefits we have over Flutter is that there's still a larger developer community for React Native, but it's always better to keep an eye on Flutter as well. Yes. So I think maybe we can provide the slides so you have the ability to go through all the links provided in the presentation. Yeah, so a couple of people have asked for the links. So I think we can share the slides with all the participation. Yeah, so does 99x use React Native for functional mobile application development? Yeah, so there's few projects we are currently using. And recently we started using Flutter as well. And also from the mobile initiative group, we have done few sessions on Flutter as well. And we are hoping to share them with everyone as well. Yeah, so there's another question. Rukshan is asking, can you explain how we can maintain storage and what are the best meshing solutions? So as I mentioned earlier, there are few options for storage. We're using async storage. So, and also if you're using Redux, there's another library called Redux Persist, which enables you to simply store your Redux itself. And then, so this will be useful if you have features like offline features. So refer Redux Persist. So if you're using Redux, it will be very useful. Yeah, so can you give a comparison with Flutter? So Flutter, mainly we are using Dart for developing. So I think since we are using React Native, if you're coming from a web development background, you can easily learn React Native than Flutter. But if you compare the performance of Flutter, the performance is actually better in Flutter. Yeah. Um, yeah. Let me go through a few more questions. Is there any platform to identify codes not supported when we come to iOS? So there's no specific platform, but from the official documentation, you can go through the native APIs which are supported. So you can basically get a better understanding of what features we can actually use using React Native. Another question is, it's just the same as React.js. Is it a must to master native development before coming to cross-platform framework? So if you're using Expo, you don't actually need to learn native code. But in industry application, most of the time you need to add in native code or integrate with native modules. In that case, you need to have a basic knowledge on native side as well. Is Expo CLI is a premium solution? Do we need to pay on deployment? No. So this is mainly used for sharing for testing. So there's no need of payment, as I know. Yeah. So Viraj is asking, will 99x completely shift to Flutter one day? So we are actually the whole mobile community here at 99x is continuously learning many other frameworks. So we will see how the migration or the learning will happen there. Yeah, so Chanaka is asking what is the purpose of X4 CLI if you can't use it for major developments. So it's based on the requirements. So if you're using a simple mobile features, then X4 CLI will be okay. And also X4 CLI provides certain native APIs as well, but it can be limited. So if you want to integrate a separate native module, so you can't use X4 CLI in that scenario. What level of knowledge in React Native is a must for before coming into the industry as an intern or junior developer? So you need to have basic knowledge in JavaScript since it's mainly used in React Native. And also it's better to do some POCs and develop something like a list view, list application. So it will cover the whole scenario there. So you need to have a bit of understanding on how the state management works and also how the navigation works. So basically how to use components and then state management, and also to have multiple screens and use the navigation. So those things you need to have a basic idea, because those are like basic features that will be used in any application. Yeah, so what is the best way to convert React Native project to APK? So there's a separate commands we use to actually build the APK. Flutter, Iconic, or React Native. So as of now, I would say based on the demand and also with the community, React Native is still on the top, but Flutter is giving a good competition. So it's best to look into Flutter as well because of that. Is there need any personal projects to prove our skills before coming to industry as a trainee? So usually for an interview, you will be asked to work on a sample project just to see how well you know the concepts and best practices. Does 99x still use Angular for web application? Yes. Can you recommend good websites or YouTube resources to learn more on mobile app development? So you can actually go through the links that I mentioned in our slides. So those basically covers the main things, the basics, navigation and state management, and also the developer tools, which will be very useful when you start in development. So actually, I haven't done a bigger application with Flutter. So one thing in Flutter is that it provides a lot of components. So it's easier to go ahead with the development. But when it's come to React Native, you need to use a lot of third-party libraries. So I think that's one of the negative things when it's come to React Native. Yeah, so I think we have reached the time, and we have answered almost every question. And I think most of the people are asking for the slides as well. So we can make sure to share it with them. Yeah, so Isru, over to you.
Yep. Thanks, Nirodha. And on behalf of the SLASCOM Regional Development Forum, I thank once again Nirodha and for all the audience who joined us today, regardless of the bad weather going on. And my sincere appreciation goes to our strategic partner, LSEC, corporate partner, Dialogue, and knowledge partner, 99x. So thank you everyone again for joining. Hope you learned something from this session and have a good evening. Stay safe. Thank you
Thanks
once again.
everyone. Bye-bye.